Alright guys, I told you all I was going to do a complete service, 10,000 mile service on my bus, and I was going to share it with you. So I'm going to make this kind of a simple video on how to do a 10,000 mile complete service on your bus. Every 10,000 miles you got a diesel engine, you need to do this service sometime sooner than later. It all depends on your driving conditions, and it also depends on where you drive. A good rule of thumb is 10,000 miles, so we're about to get started here and get her done. So I wanted to share this video with you guys, and I hope you follow along. This particular bus has the T444E, which is a 7.3 liter international engine. A lot of other bus engines, they may be different, but they're going to be similar in the way you service it. So get familiar with your engine and know it. You got to do it. So let's get started on this thing, and let's show you how it's done. Now, first thing you want to do is you want to locate your engine oil pan, and then you want to locate the drain plug. And if you're going to drain the oil, don't use a crescent wrench. Use the right size tool, either a socket or a good quality wrench. So basically the oil is going to be a little bit hot, and you want your engine to be warm when you do this service. So make sure the engine's good and warmed up, and you pop the plug loose. Good idea to have a rag ready. So we're going to go ahead and let this oil flow out. And there we are, draining the engine oil. Next thing you want to do is locate the engine oil filter. If you have a really large filter, to make life a little bit easier, it's not a bad idea to take a hammer and a punch. Next thing you want to do is locate the engine oil filter. It's not a bad idea to do what I did here, and I took a punch and I poked a hole in the bottom of it to let it drain into the pan. This way, when you're pulling the filter down, it's not heavy and you're not going to spill a whole bunch of oil on you. And make sure you get a decent wrench to loosen the filter up, and then let her drain out and remove it. So now we install the new oil filter. This one here is a Baldwin B7039. I get her good and tight with my hand. Then I use a filter wrench and give it another good snugging. Make sure she's good and snug, but not over tight. And while the oil is draining, let's move on and change the fuel filter. Okay, now we're on to the fuel filter. The fuel filter housing is right here, and here's the lid. So this is not a very good view. I got a 1/2 inch ratchet. I'm going to put it into the top, and I'm going to go ahead and start loosening up the fuel filter. And once it goes so far, you can pretty much take it out by hand. Now this is after 10,000 miles, so I want you to see what this fuel filter looks like when I pull it out of the housing. You're gonna see how dirty it is. You see that? That's a very, very dirty fuel filter. Very black, very discolored. And I can show you, in comparison with the new fuel filter is a Baldwin 7978. We will pull it out of the box and you will see the difference on a new fuel filter compared to the old, dirty fuel filter. So now that she's drained out, we can go ahead and replace it. Another thing you want to do, because I'm going to pick you guys up here, hopefully not drop you into the fuel filter bowl. But if you look down in here, you want to take a good light and you want to look inside and make sure there's not a lot of dirt and sediment down in there. If there is a lot of dirt and sediment, you want to drain it out and clean it. There's an actual drain valve right here that if I open up, this will drain the bowl out, and then I will close the valve after, well, first clean it and then close the valve and fill it with fresh fuel. But since I've done that last time and it's still pretty clean, we're just going to go ahead and put the new fuel filter in. These Baldwin filters are a complete filter, and it has the O-ring and everything built in, so you don't have to mess around, and it's a pretty good deal. I like them. So now that all the oil has drained out of the system, the new oil filter is on, the fuel filter is replaced, it's time to fill the engine with engine oil. But first thing you want to do is you want to look at your drain plug. This drain plug has a copper gasket. Make sure you don't lose that. A lot of drain plugs will have a built-in rubber O-ring or maybe some kind of nylon, or it'll have some kind of a crush gasket. So make sure you didn't drop that into the pan when you removed it, or make sure that the condition of your plug is in good shape before putting it back in, because nobody wants to have leaks after changing an oil and filter, and then you have to drain it all back out and waste it to replace the plug or the copper crush gasket or the one that you misplaced. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to slap this plug in, fill it up with oil. When you put the plug in, you thread it in by hand. You just take your wrench or socket or ratchet, give it a good snugging. Don't over tighten it. Don't cross thread it. Yeah, pretty simple stuff. Most of you are not going to have the convenience that I do right now to have a actual oil pump hose where I can pump the oil right into the engine. Basically, you're going to be using a funnel and gallon jugs. But since I got the setup, I'm going to go ahead and pump it. And something just happened to the pump. Let me try something. I'm back. I think it just farted. There it goes. So this particular engine takes anywhere from 16 to 20 quarts depending on the application. So be sure to maybe look up the specs of your particular engine to see how much oil it takes. This bus here takes about 16 to 18 quarts. It just depends. Basically, with the T444E or 7.3 Power Stroke, put 16 quarts in it, start it up, let it run, shut her down, and then let it set and settle, and then pull the dipstick and check your oil level and make sure that it is within the, the range of not over full or under full. So the drain plug's in, the oil's filling, the fuel filter's done, the oil filter's done. So what's next? Well, let's come along and see what's next. So now that I ran the engine and shut it off, I'm going to just let it set, and then I'll come back and I'll check the oil while I'm doing other services to the bus. My particular bus has the Allison AT545 transmission, and I've made cross-country trips with this thing. It's been to Florida and back. Every other oil change, which is 20,000 miles, I like to do a transmission service. So you guys want to learn how to service your AT545? You want to stick around, let's do it. This would also be similar with a 643 and other Allison transmissions. So until you get into like the 3000 series, those are different. You can see a previous video I put on servicing one of those. So let's go on underneath and service this transmission. Okay, here we are under the bus, and I located my drain for the transmission on the transmission pan. I have my bucket ready here, so I'm going to put the proper size socket onto the plug. We'll go ahead and crack her loose and drain her out. This drain plug also has some kind of gasket on it, so be careful not to lose it when you drain it out. And the transmission fluid is now draining. The fluid actually does not look bad. It's kind of clean, but I'm servicing it anyway because it's just a good, peace of mind that I'm actually servicing my transmission a little bit more often than is required. But it is what it is. This transmission will also have a filter. There is no need to remove the pan and change the internal filter. The Allison shops will tell you they only do that when they do a teardown. So you only need to change the spin-on filter if it's equipped. So let me show you that real quick. So if you look here, you will see a spin-on filter for the transmission. If you're not sure where or if you're equipped, basically look for transmission lines that come off of your transmission and follow them. If they go into a filter housing, then it is equipped with a filter. If they go directly to the Kohler with no filter, then it does not have a filter. If you were in a van chassis with a like a Ford van chassis with a 7.3 Power Stroke, earlier I said you don't need to remove the pan, but on those models you can drop the pan and replace the internal filter. It's the regular way to service that type transmission that Ford offers. So basically you just need your filter wrench, loosen her up and then spin it off, and we will replace it with the brand new transmission filter. Okay, so once you have your transmission fluid drain and your filter replaced, it's time to fill the transmission. With automatic transmissions, I really like this Lucas product. It's called Stop Slip, made by Lucas, and it's really good stuff. It's really thick, and I had it, if you notice, I had it laying on the engine, and the reason is to warm the fluid up so it pours a little better, because it's really thick stuff, like molasses. As you can see, as it's coming out, I mean, that's not too bad because I done warmed it up. But I'm not going to sit here and show you how to fill the transmission, but basically you got to estimate what you took out and put that back in. This particular transmission is going to be about 12 quarts with the fill I did. I use regular Dextron Mercon transmission fluid. I do not use synthetic transmission fluids or synthetic oils or any of that. I think the transmission was designed to run this type fluid, and that is what I'm putting back in it. So I'll be back after we put the Lucas in and fill this up, and we'll show you how to check it. Okay, now that the engine oil, the transmission fluid, and all that is full, and the fuel filter is done, we're going to go ahead and start this baby up. And keep an eye on your oil pressure when you start it and make sure it goes up. And there it goes. We're going to let that run a minute, and while it's running, before I go out there, what I like to do is hold my foot on the brake and run the transmission through the gear ranges. And we're going to let it run and go on out and check the fluid. Okay, we want to do this with the engine running. Dipstick. Well, you're probably asking yourself, we're done, right? We're finished. Nah, we're not done yet. We still got some more stuff to do here. So, the oil and filters are changed, the fuel filter is changed, the transmission fluid and filter is changed. Now we got to go check all the fluid levels, and we got to do a few more things. So, let's follow along here if you want to stay tuned and see how we do this. Okay, your air filter. It may vary on how your filter is installed or what type of filter, but this basically has a large clamp with a bolt, and you can replace the air filter if it's dirty. Mine has already been done, so I don't have to worry about it. Fluid levels, we're going to check the engine oil after it's been ran. We're going to check the coolant, make sure the coolant is full. There's usually an add and a max mark. It should be above the add, and you're good to go. The windshield washer fluid. If you have hydraulic brakes, you need to check your brake fluid. So we're checking all the fluids right now, and we also got to check differential oil. That's one important thing we need to check. It's one of the fluids that need checked every time you service it. So let's get under the bus, and I'll show you how to do that real quick. So here we are at the rear of the bus, and this is the rear differential, the rear axles. We want to check the fluid level. There is an inspection plug right here. It's usually a 1/2 inch square, or sometimes it's a external square, but basically you pull the plug and the fluid level should be level with the top of the plug. See how I'm getting fluid right there, level with the top of the plug. So my rear differential fluid is full. I don't have to add any, and I don't know if you remember a previous video, I actually serviced this rear differential by draining the gear oil from here and refilling with new gear oil, which is also an option. Now we're going to grease the chassis. I'm going to show you all the grease fittings you need to look for when you are greasing your chassis. On the very end of your steering, you have a kingpin, a pin that goes all the way through to the top and to the bottom. There is a fitting on the bottom and a fitting on the top. You also have a tie rod end right here, and you basically take your grease gun and you pump grease into the fitting. You can use a regular hand pump grease gun that you find at the hardware store, and you pump grease until you see it coming out. I don't know if this is going to stay on here. I'm trying to do this one-handed, but you pump it in there until you see it coming out, and you know you're getting a good grease job. So on the other side, we also have the similar setup. Let me grab my light so you all can see. We also have the similar setup that I showed you with a kingpin upper and lower. So you got a grease fitting here and one on the top. You got one on your tie rod end, and on the driver's side you will see a steering linkage. You need to grease the steering linkage also. On the top side, you're going to find more grease fittings. Here's the grease fitting here on the steering box. You also have a universal joint for your steering. So the steering shaft U-joint also has grease fittings that need greased. And the most important part to grease is the drive line. Let's go down there now. Like I said, the most important thing to lubricate as far as a grease job goes is your drive line. This is the propeller shaft that connects the transmission to the rear differential. And there is a grease fitting at every U-joint and slip yoke. So here's a slip yoke grease fitting here, and that is a U-joint grease fitting there. And you will find a grease fitting on every universal joint on the drive line. Very important to make sure you grease the drive line, because that there drive line gets more movement than any other part. And as you see when you start greasing it, you'll notice that the grease that's coming out, the old grease, is usually dark in color because it's working pretty hard. Also, if you have a manual transmission, you may find a few grease fittings on that also. So hang in there, we're almost done. And the last part of our service will be checking the tire pressures. In order to properly check your tire pressures, because most likely your bus has dual rear wheels, you need a dual foot gauge. with a front and rear facing outlet, as you can see here on the chuck also. So rule of thumb with any 22.5-inch wheel, it's about 100 psi per tire. You can also read the sidewall of the tire and read what the max psi is, and you can run your tires at max psi if that's what you wish. So you take your cap off, place the gauge on it, and it should be reading somewhere around 100 psi. When you go to add air to it, wait a few seconds, keep checking it with the gauge. And what I like to do to prevent leaks is after I check it with the gauge and I'm right where I need to be, I put the chuck on it and I give it one little hit. That blows out any dirt or crap in there that may cause your valve core to stick. And if it does stick, it may leak after you have checked the pressure on it. And with the rear duals, it's the same thing. You're going to have an inside tire and an outside tire. Check your tire pressures all the way around your vehicle. Make sure they're within the manufacturer's spec or the tire manufacturer's spec, which can be found on the sidewall. So that should pretty much conclude servicing Thunder today. I hope you all learned something. I hope you all got something from this. And yeah, it's done and I'm happy. So the bus is ready for the apocalypse.